Undead and Married is a romantic vampire cozy mystery and is book one in Andy Lowe's Blood Bond Agency series. The series is published by Squabbling Sparrows Press and is also available in ebook and paperback.
Chapter 3.
Dominik had just pulled to a stop near the Blood Bond Agency when there was an explosion of energy from inside. Rather than getting out, he settled back into the car's luxurious leather upholstery and watched and waited. Soon enough, the 5'0" BBA receptionist manhandled Sebastian Draco out the front door of the agency. The ease with which she'd done so, giving credence to the stories Dominik had heard of the woman's brute strength. Still, seeing it firsthand was something else altogether. Sure, Sebastian wasn't as big as Dominik, but he was half as tall again as the little blonde. And yet she had no trouble dragging the vampire across the sidewalk and sending him headlong into the gutter. She bared her teeth at him, and without a backward glance retraced her steps, disappearing inside before Sebastian stood. Dominik stayed where he was. The last thing he needed was for Sebastian to see him entering the marriage agency. If the owner of Love Bites was worried about the blonde enforcer, he hid it well, yelling threats and promises at the now-closed front door. The vampire's shriek of alarm reached Dominik's ears at the same time as the petite vampire exploded back onto the sidewalk. Sebastian didn't give her a chance to get hold of him, taking to his heels, and not slowing even when he sprinted through the front doors over at Love Bites. So fast was the altercation, there wasn't a chance the Polizei captain Hugo could intervene. Dominik doubted he would have, even if up to moving as fast as would have been required. Everyone knew Sebastian had something on the captain. In any other town, if someone had shouted threats like that, the police would have intervened, but not here. Not in Milota. But then it wouldn't be the first crime to go ignored, the latest murder being a case in point. How Hugo could have concluded a drained body lying in the middle of an alleyway was down to natural causes was anyone's guess. The reason was obvious even to the most obtuse. It wasn't as if vampirism was unknown in this part of the world. That the captain had gotten away with this weak excuse was even more of a mystery. Could it be Sebastian had dirt on more than just the captain? Dominik had always thought the mayor had left himself open to manipulation. It was another half hour before he knew the owner of Love Bites had safely hunkered down in the basement of his building. This was thanks to Dominik's ability to pick up on energy signatures, a talent he shared with the other vampires in his clan. He was readying himself to open the car door when he again stopped. The current energy in the Blood Bond Agency was spiky. Something had gotten the two women on the first floor jumpy, and he doubted Sebastian's recent visit was the cause, as it hadn't rocketed until after he was long gone. The energy signature only intensified when a third woman joined the first two. If he shut his eyes, he could even see one woman pacing back and forth. Of some surprise was that he couldn't sense Eva De Silva on the premises, not even deep in the crypt beneath the building. Could this benefit him? His fronting up to the matriarch of the De Silva clan was the one wrinkle in his plan. It was all very well, hearing that the woman would deal with anyone so long as they paid the fat fee. It was another thing entirely to put those rumors to the test. Far easier to hoodwink the two younger vampires whose energy he was picking up on. It was the ancient nouveau sang who just evicted Sebastian who could cause him issues. For this reason, he waited a little longer. Patience and timing were on his side with this venture. His visit would be awkward enough without adding this sort of energy spike to the mix. If he were close to something as powerful as that, the temptation to feed would be overwhelming. And the last thing he needed was to take out the employees of the Blood Bond Agency, courtesy of an unplanned energy siphon. No, for his plan to succeed, he had to be careful how he investigated. And if things went according to plan, the supernatural jail that was All Hallows Keep would soon get a new inmate. Or might it be 3 or 4? Even this brief thought about the foreboding structure took him back to the first time he'd met Frankie Bonnie during the winter solstice. That witch was 1 in a million, and had done strange things to his heart. Shame she only had eyes for that glorified fish fillet Zane. What did the warlock merman hybrid have that he didn't? It was still a mystery. Usually, women threw themselves at his feet and other body parts. Thinking back on what happened the previous evening had a wolfish grin making itself at home on his handsome face. Again, Dominik closed his eyes and sent his senses out. This time, he wasn't only checking on the women at the blood bond agency. Better, the police captain didn't know of his visit either. If Dominik's suspicions were right, that one knew a lot more about the murders than he let on. A quick look in the rearview mirror, and Dominik ran his fingers through his shoulder-length blonde hair, smoothing it as best he could. Only then did he exit his car and race across the cobblestone square. His pace was such that it would have been impossible for any human to track him. Fast enough to even avoid detection by most nouveaux sang. He's a mystery to solve, and the sooner he started, the sooner he'd be able to get back to his bachelor ways.
Chapter 4. Eva was back at her grandmother's desk, worried that Sebastian knew Georgia was out of town. So focused, she hadn't even bothered rearranging the stationery. Although Georgia's absence wasn't exactly a secret, they hadn't broadcast it either. This was why her grandmother always traveled freight instead of flying commercial. Georgia was a powerful woman with powerful enemies, some of whom were too close for comfort. The less they knew about her movements, the better. The bell above the front door tinkled, and Eva's heartbeat again increased. She wouldn't have thought Sebastian would be brave enough to show his face again, at least not for a day or two. He was incredibly brave, or maybe just as stupid as she'd always thought. This time, she wasn't leaving his eviction to Didi, she would show him the gutter all on her own. It was about time she used her hematite strength to her advantage. However, she hadn't had a chance when Didi shot through the gap left by her partially closed office door. Her face was deathly white even by vampire standards. Rather than looking as though she'd seen a creep, the receptionist looked as though she'd seen a ghost. Whomever their visitor was, it wasn't Sebastian. Eva had just finished mouthing, "Who is it?" when there was a knock on her office door, with it then swinging inward. Upon seeing who was there, Eva was as shocked as Didi, perhaps even more so. She never would have expected to see Dominik Zilonka darken the doorstep of the blood bond agency in her lifetime. If the Zilonka and De Silva matriarchs being sworn enemies weren't enough of a deterrent, this vamp was a bachelor with a capital B. He was a playboy with a reputation that stretched back hundreds of years. There wasn't a chance he was ready to settle down, especially if the pictures in the society pages of that evening's paper had anything to say about it. Eva only knew her mouth was hanging open when Didi opened her own wide, before subtly putting her hand under her chin and closing it. It was enough for Eva's mouth to snap shut, even if in her mind it was still hanging wide. As she took in his tall, solid frame, she noticed the intricate details of his face. She could see the faint stubble on his jawline and the way his blonde hair was slightly tousled. Her shock wasn't just because he was on the premises, but also because of the overwhelming charisma emanating from him in waves. The air crackled with electricity, her skin tingling in response to its caress. His presence was magnetic, drawing her in, threatening to swallow her. It was intoxicating, and she couldn't help but stare. She was mesmerized by the way he moved and by the sound of his deep, sultry voice when he said, "May I come in?" This was the first time she'd ever laid eyes on him in person, although they were both vampires born, not made. The only way the De Silvas would have received an invitation to visit Castle Ration was if Natalia, the Zilonka clan's matriarch, had kicked the bucket. And that wouldn't happen without a stake or decapitation on the cards, or perhaps both, if her reputation was to be believed. Eva gestured toward the visitor's chair, moistening her mouth enough that she could speak. "Ah, please take a seat." It was a struggle to get this out. How on earth was she supposed to set up an appointment for him when she was stumbling over her words? "Can I get you a drink, Count Zilonka?" Perfectly timed as it was, Didi's request, while robotic, gave Eva the space to compose herself. His ordering of a red stinger, hot blood with a shot of vodka, came as no surprise. Nothing about the man on the other side of the desk said he'd opt for warmed blood as the women had enjoyed. If his reputation was to be believed, it surprised Eva that he hadn't asked for a snake venom chaser. They waited while Didi fetched his drink. The silence was awful, but Eva couldn't fill it with small talk, as she usually would. Even discussing the weather would have been better than this. It was with relief she watched Didi return with Dominik's drink, sitting on a silver tray. Their guest didn't give the receptionist time to put the tray down. Instead, he grabbed the glass and slugged the contents back in a single draft, doing so without wincing. It was something that was both impressive and of concern. His only reaction to downing the potent brew was to lick his lips, something Eva unconsciously copied. With Didi still next to him, he then dropped the empty glass back on the tray and turned to face Eva. Did the guy have a drinking problem, or was it visiting a marriage agency that had him desperate for a drink? It was time to find out, although she held her questions until Didi left. However, contrary to standard practice, the receptionist didn't shut the door but left it wide open. And no amount of glaring from Eva had her closing it. The older vampire would never have done so if Georgia was there. Was it that Didi wanted Dominik Zilonka to know he was being watched? Perhaps it was better for Eva not to entomb herself with their drop-dead gorgeous client, as tempting as that was. Count Zilonka, how can we help you? I was expecting to speak to Georgia. Not that I'm complaining about her replacement. With a wide grin he leaned forward, his cologne soon clouding her thoughts. The warmth of his body radiated toward her, sending shivers down her spine. The man had a hold on her, and she couldn't fight it, even if it made her nervous at some level. Without conscious thought, Eva analyzed the energy the vampire on the other side of the large desk was firing at her. While he might find her attractive, he was also lying. He knew full well Georgia wasn't there, but unable to accuse him outright, Eva instead held her hands out to the side. If it was okay for him to lie to her, let's see how he liked it. My grandmother is busy right now. However, I'll be happy to make an appointment for you. Even though he'd lied about expecting to see her grandmother, it didn't mean he knew where Georgia was or how long she would be. Eva wasn't sure what it was, but there was something wrong with him. Not physically, but hidden deep inside his gorgeous muscled chest. Could he be the vampire responsible for the murders? It would explain the waves of energy he was firing at her, with these probing and caressing. The one thing Eva was sure of was that Dominik Zilonka wasn't there to secure a bride. There were a lot of reasons for this. The first was that any single vampire within a 500-mile radius had already thrown herself at him. No doubt often and with minimum clothing involved. And now that Eva had seen him up close and personal, she understood why this was. She'd never reacted to a man like this, with her wanting to do wicked things to, and with him. Second, his playboy reputation was one that was well earned. And most important of all, the role of selecting his bride was Natalia Zilonka's alone. Before going any further with this farce, Eva wanted confirmation. Apart from him lying to her earlier, something was all kinds of wrong. You realize this is the Blood Bond Agency and not Love Bites. There was nothing she could do about the feral hiss that followed her mention of Sebastian's dating agency. If Dominik noticed her slip, he didn't react. Instead, he inched forward in his seat, his dark brown eyes skimming her body and leaving her as aroused as if he'd touched her. Eva leaned back to put some space between them and try to get her body back under her control. That is not a mistake I would make, is it? The waves now emanating from him were like a living thing, nudging her personal space. In response, she erected a wall of protective energy, something Eva De Silva had taught her how to do when she was a child. It was that, or crawl across her desk and help herself to the mouth-watering man repeatedly. While she'd been circumspect with her use of energy, this was the first time the vampire being blocked had noticed. Although even then, the reaction was subtle, with only an imperceptible widening of his eyes. As if to offset this, he smiled, the gesture perhaps designed to put her at her ease or seduce. With vampires of Dominik's type, it wasn't always easy to tell. Eva was on the fence regarding the gorgeous vampire's ulterior motive for visiting them unannounced. Common practice was for formal appointments to be made, rather than an impromptu drop-in like this. It was also more common for the clan leader to undertake any blood bond negotiations. Eva couldn't decide if she was relieved or not to be facing Dominik instead of Natalia. Who was she kidding? Natalia's reputation was hideous. A vicious, cunning pit of vipers was how Eva De Silva had described the Zilonka matriarch, with an undisclosed history between the pair. Natalia would never call on Georgia, unannounced or otherwise. So why was Dominik here? He cleared his throat, looking to be ready to speak, although he stayed mute. It was his looking pointedly at the still open door that had Eva finally getting up and closing it. The expression on Didi's face gave her pause. While the older vampire was no longer as sheet white as she'd been earlier, neither was she completely composed. Meanwhile, Lilith, who was back down in reception and busy straightening already straight magazines, looked crestfallen to be shut out. They'd both have to wait until after he left to get their update. It would also be then that Eva would get Didi to explain why she'd been so spooked. Only once she was again seated at her grandmother's desk did Dominik continue. I find myself in an unusual position. I need a bride. Again Eva struggled for words, barely able to squeak out, need? Perhaps not the best choice of words. He went quiet before adding, want? It was an improvement, but she still wasn't buying what he was selling. And Natalia, Countess Natalia? There was no need for her to add anything further to her question. Ah yes, Natalia. Aside from how hesitant his words were, Eva had once again detected a strange flash of energy from him. His voice dropped even further when he added, she has decided that I may undertake the blood bond myself. She has? Dominik's gaze boring into Eva's made it plain she'd just accused him of lying, and he wasn't happy about it. That I am undertaking my match cannot pass these walls. Do I make myself clear? There was nothing flirtatious about his request. The icy glint in his eyes revealed, as accurately as a blood test, that he was related to Natalia. Yes, of course. We wouldn't have it any other way. Eva grabbed hold of the diary and flipped it open to the Monday evening of her grandmother's return. Georgia is available at 9, 10, or 11 on the 15th. Which of those times suits you best? None of them. Eva frowned. He hadn't so much as looked at the calendar on his phone. Perhaps something on the 16th? Eva flipped the page over and looked up at him, her pen poised and ready to enter his details. Ms. De Silva, you don't understand. I have no wish to wait. I'd like to register now. I wish to settle this issue quickly. This could not be happening. Her grandmother had said it was a possibility, but Eva hadn't wanted to believe her. The only thing Georgia hadn't foreseen was that it would be the groom pushing for a settlement, and that it would be a Zilonka at that. His insistence was what Eva would have expected from one of the various matriarchs, not a renowned bachelor. Bang went the hope of her simply having to hold the fort and make the occasional appointment until George's return. Eva opened the drawer on her right and removed a clipboard with an application form already attached. She slid this across the desk along with a fountain pen already primed with a mix of George's blood and ink bound with magic. The Zilonka clan wasn't the only one to have magical friends at their disposal. Legend and Georgia would have it, the ink forced the applicant to be truthful with their answers and saved a lot of angst in the vetting process. It would be interesting to see how Dominik fared with his responses. He'd already proved he was not averse to telling a mistruth.
If you've enjoyed these chapters, we'd love it if you could give them a thumbs up. And if you'd like to continue the story, you can subscribe and tap the bell to be notified when the next chapter is released.